begins by showing a group of gangsters packing drugs for distribution. But suddenly, a masked man appears to attack the place and intends to rob the drug stock belonging to the gangsters there. Even though he was alone, the masked man managed to defeat the gangsters one by one. Though when he had succeeded in seizing the gangsters' drugs and was about to escape, a police force appeared and cornered him so that he was caught and put in jail. The masked man is named Terry Savage, who turns out to be a former Marine with the rank of sergeant. His track record in the military was also revealed, in which he had received many medals from the government for his services on the battlefield, especially while serving in Afghanistan. But before being put in prison, Terry is visited by a police commissioner named Harvey, who asks why a war hero like him has turned into a street criminal. Hearing Harvey's words annoyed Terry, and he explained that the reason was none other than the difficulties of living after retiring from the military. He thinks that his country doesn't appreciate his service as a war veteran, making it difficult for him to find a job with a decent salary. Hearing this, Harvey said the reason for meeting Terry was to give him a mission while in prison later. It turns out he was assigned to investigate a prison warden suspected of committing many violations of the law, such as human rights violations, acts of corruption, and drug business. Harvey explained that all this time, the police had had difficulty investigating the prison because the prison had maximum security, and it seemed that the chief warden was also above the law because he was suspected of being protected by mafia groups and corrupt government officials. Harvey promised that Terry would be released from all punishments and that all his criminal records would be erased if he completed his mission to get a proper job to pay for his daughter's medical expenses, which turned out to be seriously ill. His daughter's health condition is the main reason Terry is desperate to find shortcuts to earn money in the wrong way so far. With all these considerations, he finally accepted Harvey's offer, and Harvey also gave him 10 days to complete the mission. After the agreement was made, Terry was finally taken to the prison along with other prisoners. When they arrived at the prison, they were greeted by a lieutenant named Killian and his deputy named Roy. Killian emphasized to the new prisoners to obey all the orders of the wardens in prison. If anyone disobeyed, they would get the most painful punishment. After that, all the prisoners, including Terry, were given a chip injection in their necks which functioned to monitor all the prisoners' movements in prison. Then they were all put into their respective cell rooms. At the same time, Terry realized that the prison where he was now was not an ordinary prison because most of the prisoners were high-class criminals who were known to be very brutal. When Terry got to his cell, he apparently got a cell phone from Harvey hidden under the bed without the knowledge of the prison guards, and he would use the cell phone to report to Harvey about all the crimes that took place in the prison. The scene then changed and showed Terry, who was in the dining room. Not long after, a prisoner named Chris suddenly tried to make trouble with him, but he chose not to serve Chris even though Terry could beat him up. The next day, when Terry was in the prison yard, he was visited by a prisoner named John, who invited him to join his mafia group. John explained that Terry would be safe if he had allies in prison, but he refused and said that he preferred to act alone. In the evening, while in the laundry room, Terry sees John being attacked by a group of prisoners, but John easily overpowers them. At night, it was Terry's turn to be attacked by Chris and his group in his cell, but in the middle of the fight, a prisoner came to help him. Not long after, the wardens came and separated them. After that, the prisoners who fought, including Terry, were locked up in their respective isolation rooms. The next day, Chris and Terry were brought by Killian to face the chief warden named Lucas. Chris received a stun sentence from Lucas because he attacked new prisoners without permission. After that, Terry was brought into Lucas's room, and Lucas apologized to him for the attack by Chris and his comrades. Soon after, Lucas told Terry to sit down because he was interested in Terry's background, who was an ex-Marine that he might be able to rely on. He explained that he managed a room that he called Dungeon. Lucas added that if Terry wanted to work with him as a fighter in Dungeon, he promised to get Terry out of prison as soon as possible so he could meet his daughter again. After that, Lucas gave Terry a fighter uniform and told him to meet a prisoner who would become his roommate. Then, a female warden named Maria escorted Terry to the cell room. When he just entered the cell room, he was surprised because it turned out that the one who would become his roommate was a prisoner named Bones, who had helped him last night. Terry, curious, then asked why Bones was good at fighting. Bones replied that his father was a martial arts master. Bones then warned him about the harshness of fighting in the dungeon, but Bones also promised to help him face all his opponents. After that, Terry went to the toilet and reported to Harvey about the dungeon there. The next day, Bones took Terry to a gym room to practice martial arts in preparation for facing the fighters in the dungeon. Next, he introduces which mafia groups will be a tough opponent for Terry later, and one of them is John, the top dog or defending champion. Then Terry knew that the selected prisoners would be brought to the dungeon to be met in battle every Friday night, and that night was his turn. Terry, who was already wearing a fighter uniform, was brought by Killian and Maria to the fighting arena, and he was also accompanied by Bones. Upon arrival, Terry saw Lucas, who was also there and was sitting on his throne. When Terry had just arrived at the dungeon, Lucas explained that this place was a place for wild fights without rules. Besides that, the fight will be broadcast live to all prisoners and on a paid basis on the internet. At the same time, there was a fight between representatives of two mafia groups who were against each other in prison, and the one fighting was John, the reigning champion with the nickname Freeway. Then John won the battle quite easily and defended his title as top dog. After that, it was Terry's turn to face El Papiro, a Mexican mafia group's representative. In the first round, Terry, who was still stiff, was easily knocked out by El Papiro. But in the second round, his adrenaline began to race until, in the end, he turned things around and won the fight with a knockout victory over El Papiro. His victory was greeted with cheers from the prisoners watching, including Lucas, the warden who looked satisfied with his appearance. After the fight, John was asked to face Lucas to choose a reward for his victory. Then Lucas said that John could make anyone request he wanted, and he asked to be released from prison as Lucas had previously promised. However, Lucas instead refused his request and explained that John had to win at least one more fight, and after that, he would be released. Hearing this, John threatened Lucas that if he did not keep his promise, John, his group, and the other prisoners would create a big riot in prison. The scene then changes and shows Terry being visited by a lawyer named Jeanette, who used to help free war veteran prisoners. She said she had seen it and concluded that the criminal case that ensnared Terry was because he was forced to find the money for his daughter's medical expenses, so Jeanette intended to offer legal assistance to get him out of jail. However, Terry is currently carrying out a secret mission from Harvey, so he is forced to refuse legal assistance from her. The scene changed again, and Terry was seen currently in the dining room, but John suddenly threatened him because John was not happy with his victory last night. John then warned Terry not to mess with him if he didn't want to get into serious trouble in prison. Long story short, Terry is back in the fight, and this time he has to face Dragon, one of Asia's mafia group prisoners who looks arrogant while showing off the kung fu moves he masters. But unexpectedly, Dragon was actually defeated by Terry with just one punch. That made John even more furious because he worried Terry would replace his position as top dog or the strongest prisoner in prison. When Terry returned to the cell room, Bones explained why he could be imprisoned because he had killed the person who violated his younger sister. Hearing that, Terry sympathized and said that he was a good man. At the same time, Bones also praised Terry, saying he was a good father. The next day, when Terry was on duty, he was suddenly attacked by several members of John's group. Maria, who saw this, tried to intervene, but instead, she was stabbed by one of John's men. Luckily, she was rescued, which made Terry furious, so he went to Lucas and asked him to arrange a fight between him and John. But Lucas refused Terry's request and said he was not ready to fight John, a top dog or a champion fighter. But Terry still insisted and urged him to arrange the fight. On the other hand, John apparently never ordered his crew to attack Terry, and he was actually very angry when he knew about the careless actions of his members. After that, Lucas took John's group to the dungeon to be punished because he was upset over their actions, which had caused one of the wardens to become injured. Without thinking twice, Lucas even had the heart to kill the two of John's men as a form of warning to John so that he could take care of his group and not break the rules he had made. After warning John, Lucas finally told John to fight Terry. Meanwhile, Terry seemed to be training hard for the match, but he also managed to send information about the prison situation and the violations he encountered to Harvey. Long story short, the battle between Terry and John began, and in the first round, the fight was dominated by Terry. The same thing happened in the second round, where he was still in control even though John also gave several counterattacks. In the end, Terry beat John, the defending champion, so he won the top dog title. As a result of his victory over John last night, all prisoners now acknowledge Terry and submit to him. In the afternoon, Terry was seen facing Lucas, and Lucas thanked him for winning last night because his fight video sold at a very high price. For this reason, he appointed Terry as his confidant and leading all the prisoners in prison. Not only that, but Lucas also asked Terry to help manage his drug business which was hidden in prison. After being entrusted with managing Lucas's drug business, he secretly took samples of the drugs there. Next, Lucas showed the bodies of the two members of John's group he had killed for attacking Terry and said that was evidence from him that he really cared about Terry's safety in prison. However, it was also evidence for Terry to reveal the human rights violations committed by Lucas in prison. Besides that, Terry didn't seem so tempted by Lucas's offer that he instead flatly rejected the offer by saying that he just wanted to get out of prison as promised by Lucas earlier so he could meet his daughter again. Hearing Terry's refusal, Lucas took him to meet someone waiting in his room, and it turned out that person was Harvey, making Terry realize that the mission was just a fake mission to trap him. Terry finally found out that Harvey and Lucas had worked together in managing illegal businesses in the prison, including the drug business. Then they deliberately took advantage of his fighting skills as the best former Marine and his experience in the street drug business. However, Terry still insisted on refusing their offer. Unfortunately, it turned out that they had taken Bones hostage and threatened to kill him so that Terry would follow their orders. In the end, he is forced to obey Harvey and Lucas. As time went on, without Lucas and Harvey's knowing, Terry and Bones secretly instigated all the prisoners to plan an uprising. This was very easy for Terry because all the prisoners in prison were already on his side and were fed up with Lucas's attitude since he is arrogant and acts arbitrarily toward the prisoners. All the prisoners in prison began to work together to help Terry's plan, and for legal problems, he asked for help from Jeanette, who offered to help him at that time. Then he handed over all the evidence of Lucas and Harvey's crimes that he had collected so far because the careless Harvey apparently forgot to take all the evidence from him. For the next fight, Lucas deliberately invites a prisoner known as a tough fighter from another prison named Kaka to fight Terry. Soon after, the battle between them begins. In the first round, Terry was knocked down many times by Kaka, but in the second round, he began to turn things around and knew Kaka's weaknesses, so in the end, he beat Kaka. After that, Terry ordered all the prisoners to start rioting in the dungeon, which made things even more heated and chaotic. Shortly after that, Lucas' men appeared carrying weapons to quell the rioting, but their efforts ended in vain because they were outnumbered by the prisoners. At the same time, Lucas tried to save himself, but Terry realized this and tried to chase him until they finally faced each other. Lucas, who had a gun, managed to shoot Terry, who was about to attack him. But Terry managed to survive because he was wearing a bulletproof vest, which is one of the fighter attributes given by Lucas. Not long after that, the police from the headquarters arrived at the prison, succeeded in arresting Lucas, and managed to quell the riots in the dungeon. The police managed to arrive on time for a report from Jeanette, which informed them of the crime committed by Lucas and his accomplices. The film ends by showing Terry meeting Jeanette, who explains that he has received a reward from the government for complete freedom thanks to his services in uncovering a crime case at the prison involving Police Commissioner Harvey and several prison warden heads, including Lucas. Not only that, but the government will also pay for the treatment of Terry's daughter until she fully recovers. Before he left prison, Terry said goodbye and thanked Bones for his help while Terry was in prison. When Terry came out of his cell room, he was greeted with cheers from the prisoners who flattered him, and in the end, he got out of prison and could meet his daughter again. Meanwhile, Lucas is crying and grumbling because he is imprisoned in a special cell to be held accountable for all his crimes. The film ends.